So please join with me in welcoming Rabbi King.
Thank you, Professor Close, and thank you to all of you. Often when speakers are introduced, there's a sense in which I'm doing you a favor by speaking to you, but the truth is that you're doing a favor by listening to me. So I thank you for your attention. I also want to thank the representatives of the Philosophy Club over at SDSU. I got a chance to speak with you guys last year, and you recommended that I come back in this setting, and I want to thank you for that contact. I'm not going to make a sustained argument from beginning to end, as would be proper for a philosophical treatise. Rather, this talk is going to be like a review paper. One of the best assignments I ever got in philosophy was to write an annotated bibliography, to take a number of books that roughly circle around a topic, put the name of the book, the thesis of the book, and gather them together. So you show sort of, and then provide a review paper to say, this is a conversation that's going on, and these are some of the points of view in the conversation. That's the way my talk is going to be, and as Martha Nussbaum once said about Aristotle over Hero, when I get philosophers right, it's the philosopher, and when I get them wrong, it's my own mistake. So I apologize in advance for any errors I may make in my understanding of the great works of the tradition. So Professor Close mentioned, I thank you for your introduction, how it is that I left academia on one level for practicing within a religious community. And I'm no Alistair McIntyre for those who have read his work. For me, pursuing philosophy was about pursuing the questions that I had that were philosophical questions. I always wanted to be a philosopher. When I went to college, I started majoring in philosophy. And around my mid-30s, I realized that I had answered the questions that I set out to ask. And it seemed kind of inappropriate for me to stay in the conversation when I really went into it to answer my own questions rather than to engage in an ongoing set of questions with professional colleagues. The main questions I set out to answer, and I found my own answers, are centered around religion and science. Is scientific knowledge different than religious knowledge? Are they two separate spheres? One, let's say, that deals with moral and ethical questions, and one that deals with verifiable and empirical questions. Are they in competition? Do they make claims that could be in competition with each other? And how does one live a life where one devotes oneself to questions and answers in a community in which assumptions are made and arguments are made? Do those arguments have validity? I actually I'm sort of giving you the end at the beginning in terms of where I went, which is this. I spent a lot of time talking about that these are really separate spheres. And you shouldn't put them in competition, and you should protect religion from scientific questions. And while there is some truth in that, I've actually come to a more simple place. We're all trying to understand what the universe is and what our place in the universe is. And wherever answers and information come from and worthwhile experiences to share, we share them. You could be sharing laboratory experience that comes out of science. You could be sharing personal experience that comes out of your life or the life of the community that you've lived in. So I actually see them as with a great intersection. In the process of the 20 years or so I spent in academia, one of the things that gnawed at me is that I think religion is seriously misunderstood. And I spent 20 years in the philosophy of religion. I did most of my work in religious studies departments, where I took something like a third of my courses in philosophy. But I always ended up in religious studies, and I felt, I'm doing religious studies. I'm reading Christian ethics. I'm teaching Zen Buddhism, and I'm, of course, in my own special area of Jewish philosophy. And consistently, philosophers seem to make assumptions about what it means to be religious that I didn't hold. I grew up in a religious family. My father is a rabbi, a conservative rabbi. I've always been observant within the Jewish traditions. And I just didn't find the assumptions being made that would then be put to the test and be put to argument, actually the correct assumptions that describe my experience. So one thing I want to say is I'm not going to describe a little bit of my experience, and I hope I don't offend anyone. My understanding of religion may be very different from your own. And so I may say, for me, what I think it means to be religious may conflict with anyone who's religious in the room. And so I hope you'll forgive me in that regard, that I'm telling you what it's been like in my community and for me. So let's throw out a little bit about, let me ask you a question. How many people here, raise their hand, would describe themselves as at least moderately religious? Good. How many people would consider themselves, and you can, in religious, you can still raise your hand if you raised it before, spiritual. Now, raise your hand if you're spiritual. Put it down if you're not religious. I want to see how many people are spiritual but not religious. So you'll notice that most people in this room who are religious describe themselves as spiritual, and we don't have many people, which is unusual for many audiences, that describe themselves as spiritual but just can't stand organized religion. I get that a lot as a rabbi, so I have a lot of frustration. Just in case you know, Jews are a different breed. Jews have no problem like throwing the tomatoes at the rabbi on the bima and saying, hey rabbi, cut the sermon short, we're not interested. I'm always jealous of my friends who are Christian cleric, because I always feel like they get so much respect from their people. Jews are very pushy and they have no problem disagreeing with their pastor, so I'm used to getting in a lot of trouble. And it stems all the way from our tradition, which is a tradition of legal argument. So one of the assumptions that I found commonly made was that if you are religious, you believe that the Bible is true. Of course, as anyone here who engages in philosophy, well, what do we mean by that statement? What do we mean that the Bible is true? Well, it was written by God, it was a revelation, it was written word, it came about from God directly, word for word, and when it says something, you believe it. Let's not be too fancy about this. So if it says that Eve was made from a rib of Adam, then Eve was made from a rib of Adam. I was alive back then. I remember when on television, there was a press conference when the Southern Baptist Convention had a coup. Southern Baptists used to be liberals. And it came in their seminary, they used to ordain women. They used to be fairly liberal. And I remember when there was a coup on the board and there was a press conference on national television, and they said that we are firing our women faculty and that we are doing it because the Bible says that Eve was made from a rib of Adam and that she is to be a helper to him. So he's in charge. I'm watching in the national television, a public audience, that if you read the Bible, then this is what it means to be religious. It means to believe that that's literally true. We've got a couple of problems with this. At least I do. First off, in my tradition, if you start reading the commentaries on the Bible that define the contours of the arguments and the dialogue, that provide the context of how we understand the Bible, now I'm talking about books like the Talmud, which is basically a compilation of the thought of our sages from about 200 BCE to about 800 CE, pretty much a solid 1,000 years, and sets out the contours of what it means to be a Jew and how we think about these things. One of the first things it says is, well, everyone knows that the word rib doesn't really mean rib. The Hebrew word selah really means side. It's a pretty rare Hebrew word, actually, and it occurs later in the early parts of the Bible to describe half a tent. Basically, a kind of a rib that holds up a tent. So the rabbis immediately say, fools think that Eve was made from a rib. But anyone who can really read Hebrew knows that Eve was made from a side of Adam. And then they go further. They get very Platonic. They knew Platonic thought. Let's go further than that. Eve is only made from the side of Adam in chapter 2 of Genesis. But in chapter 1, there's a really inconvenient issue. Adam was already made before Adam is made the second time. In Genesis chapter 1, we have the creation of Adam. The word Adam means human, or it really means, if you want to translate it most literally, it means earthling. It comes from the word Adamah, which meaning earth or clay, and Adam comes from the earth. We are earth beings. We are earthlings. So the earthling, the human, was made already in chapter 1, and it says it was made in the likeness of God, and it was made both zachar u'nekeva, both masculine and feminine. And then that story seems to disappear by chapter 2, and suddenly God says, I'm going to make a human being. I'm going to take it from the earth, and I'm going to shape it, and then it's not that it be alone, so I'm going to take out the side, and then there will be a man and a woman. And the word changes from human to man and woman, to ish and isha in the Hebrew. So the rabbis say, well, if you think about this, what you get from this is the first human organism. The first organism that God has in mind is actually both male and female at the same time. Both masculine and feminine. It isn't whatever you want to call it. My biological terms escape me after AP Bio. So it is asexual, it is multisexual, it is hermaphroditic. I don't know what the word is, but you have one organism that's both masculine and feminine at the same time. So why this story in chapter 2? Well, it must be that Eve was taken, that this organism, this Adam, is divided in half along the side. So basically they say, imagine an organism divided in half, and then the male half is put over here, and the female half is put over there. So already, let's just stop right there. The most basic level of the interpretation of my tradition is Eve is not subservient to Adam, because the word Adam doesn't mean man, it means human. And it says that Eve was taken, and then there was a man, so now we have a woman and we have a man. So it's not that Eve is lesser, Eve is just half of the original being, just as the man is half of the original being. What else do we learn from this, the rabbis say? It doesn't say in chapter 2 that this human being is in the image of God. So those of us who walk around saying we're all in God's image, it's very, very nice, but the rabbis say it might not be true. Because actually it was only the original human made in chapter 1 where it says it was in God's image, not in chapter 2. So it could well be, the rabbis actually suggest this, and they are in debt partly to Greek philosophy, as I mentioned. They say that when two partners come together in the sexual act, that they have the possibility of recreating the original being. They have a possibility of bringing godliness, because when the male and female, let me put it easier. If the organism that was both male and female at the same time was in the image of God, then God must be both male and female at the same time. And we don't get the privilege, except potentially, in the unity of partnership. It sounds like a great marriage sermon. I try to use it, usually falls flat, but it actually is more than that. It's a sort of a philosophical concept. But right there I realized, looking at that television, women are subservient to men because they're made from a rib, and the man is supposed to be in charge. Doesn't sound like what I've ever learned in my tradition or studied. Another thing, but doesn't it say, Rabbi Cain, that in chapter 2, that the woman was supposed to be a helper to Adam? Well, again, our tradition points to the Hebrew. The Talmud says, it actually says that she's an ezer kinegdo. An ezer means a help. Kineged is the word versus, or opposing. If you've got one football team playing another, then you get team A neged the other team. Team A versus team B. Team A opposing team B. So it actually says she's a helper opposing him. It could mean visually, you take two halves and split them in half, and they're mirrors, they're opposites, they're opposing. What the rabbis say is there's actually a moral message in there, which is that actually the men and women are going to struggle with one another. They're going to be like two opposite sides of the team. And the rabbis say, again, this goes over a little bit better in my marriage sermons. The rabbis say, if the man is good to the woman, she'll be a helper. And if he's not good to the woman, she's going to oppose him. So she's the enemy. But they said this 2,000 years ago. So this is, okay, I'm going to do a little bit more with Genesis to give you an idea. So, she's supposed to serve the man? Not so much. Okay, well, how about, I believe in science. The religious people don't believe in science. After all, it says the world was created in 6 days. I don't believe the world was created in 6 days. Lately, science says something like, the last I read, 12 billion years. So 6 days, 12 billion years, it's a little bit different. And this runs into a conflict. I go back to the Talmud. So I go back to the tradition that I'm being raised in, I grow out of, in my formative religion. The Talmud points out, on the first day, God says, let there be light. On the fourth day, God says, let there be the things that make light. In Hebrew, let there be or, And let there be mi'orot, let there be the things that create light, the sun and the stars primarily. So the rabbis say, wait a second. The Bible's trying to tell us something, at least two things. Number one, what's the light on day one? If on the fourth day the things that make light occur. I'm going to hold that in reserve for a second. And number two, how do we count days? Now, basically, the way you and I count a day, hopefully, is the sun goes up, the sun goes up, and the sun comes up again. Sunrise to sunrise, or sunset to sunset. The problem is the sun wasn't created until the fourth day, and the stars weren't created until the fourth day. We certainly weren't created until the fourth day. So the rabbis say, a God day and a human day must be completely different. The idea that God operates according to human concepts is problematic in assumptions about what religious people think. The rabbis, in fact, point to the Psalms, those who like to read the Bible, and I'm one of them. Most of our prayers in Judaism come out of the Psalms. The Psalms, one of the Psalms in the hundreds says, I'm terrible with numbers, says, 1,000 years is but a day to God. And so the rabbis quote that, and they say, see, it's in the Bible already. It says you have no idea how long a God day is. It could be 1,000 years, it could be longer. So there, as a religious person, I don't have a conflict with science. I don't read it and say, oh no, I have to reject physics in order to believe in the Bible. Because 2,000 years ago, the sages who created our tradition, created the contours of the conversation, didn't have a problem with it either. They didn't have a problem with that you're not supposed to read this 6 days literally. Let's go back to the other one, the light thing. The sages ask. Remember this. I'll do the light, then I'll tell you the next thing. God says, let there be or. Could mean energy, by the way. Light, energy, same word in Hebrew. Let's just translate it energy. God said, let there be energy. On the fourth day, God said, let there be the things that make a visual light. So the rabbis already said, what was created on the first day, the first thing that comes through the creation, might not be light like you and I think about it, might not be visual light, but it could be a form of energy. They even go further. They say, and God energy may not be the same thing as human energy anyway. So not only are we beyond the idea that we're talking about light, but we could even be beyond the idea that we're talking about the kinds of energies we even have experience of. Just to show how influential that particular part of the Talmud was, the theory that was passed in oral tradition from only rabbinic master to rabbinic disciple, you could only study it, it was a part of Jewish mysticism, you could only study it if you were 40 years old and you were male and you were a rabbi and you were married. And once you apprenticed to a master and learned and studied sort of the elite teachings, the elite mystical teachings of what the Bible means, you were not allowed to pass this on to the populace because it was felt that they would not understand the teachings. And that changed in the late 1700s when a rabbi named the Baal Shem Tov decided to publicize the teachings, and they became a big hit. And they're a hit to this day. This was the teaching about what happened at creation. It said the secret name of God is, one of the secret names of God, is infinity. And one day, infinity decided, how infinity decides, we can have a conversation at the end. Infinity decides that it wants to produce something finite. But since infinity, there's no space, and there's no dimension of space, and there's no dimension of time within infinity, has to make a space, has to make the contours of space. So the teaching goes, an empty space appears somewhere within infinity. And energy pours into this empty space, and matter begins to form. The matter could not contain this energy. It was the energy of day one. They're interpreting that. Could not contain the energy because God energy cannot fit in a one-to-one correspondence into matter. And so the matter, this point, they said it was an infinitesimally small point. It exploded. And we live in the universe that is the result of that explosion. This was written down in about the 1400s, but it's a teaching that looks to be about 1,000 years older than that. Now, that sounds a lot like the Big Bang. I love the idea that it sounds like the Big Bang. But my claim to you is not that somehow they knew about the Big Bang and wrote it down. My claim to you is this. They could read the same Bible that people read today, and from a few basic facts that you now have on your plate, they drew that conclusion. It's amazing. Energy, but the light is something else. Basically, the stars are made on the fourth day. And if you do like one of those Stephen Hawking or you watch one of those PBS shows with Morgan Freeman or whoever those are, you see how the stars come later in the process after the Big Bang, and then they become the factories that make the elements out of which the periodic table arises, and eventually life. To me, as a religious person, follows the contours of what Genesis is talking about. And if someone says, well, you're kind of reading evolution and the Big Bang back into it, then we're 1,500 years ago. So I don't feel like I'm doing something weird and different. I feel like the conversation about religion that takes place in the public sphere today is doing something weird and different. Taking the Bible literally. One of my favorite Jewish quotes, it's about 200 years old, but it sums up a lot of rabbinic teaching. He who reads the Bible and is not troubled by it, the worst scoundrel is better than he. He who reads the Bible and is not troubled by it, the worst scoundrel is better than such a person. How is Scripture understood by the rabbis of the Talmud? It's understood as the greatest Dear John letter ever written. Essentially, in my tradition, our paradigm is that we had a country, and our country had a temple. And in that temple, people came from all over the world, Jews from all over the world, to worship God. It was in Jerusalem. The Wailing Wall today is one of the support walls for the foundation of it. And remember, Judaism wasn't a religion, it was a country from about 1000 BCE to around 70 CE, probably a little earlier. And when that temple was destroyed and the Romans destroyed our people and massacred us and slaughtered us, that there was a sense in which how could God be present and let what was a country go to waste, be destroyed, and our greatest rabbis be tortured? And they said, the temple may be gone. And in a sense, God, the presence of God so close to us, we don't have any longer after that. But if you have a question, the answer is located within Scripture. What God basically did is God took God's presence that used to exist somehow spatially, although even that is like a holy mystery, we can talk about that. And God took God's very presence and put it into the words of Scripture. And therefore, anyone who reads it like a human document is a fool and an idiot. Not only that, a scoundrel, is offensive. Because this is like a letter written to you by God. And it has all the answers, it has to all of the questions that could come up for thousands and tens of thousands of years in the future. If I have a problem about saying, should I really keep my cell phone on and let myself be disturbed all through my life, or should I be shutting it off so I'm more present for the people in front of me? If I read Scripture carefully enough, I will eventually find an answer in there. But it's not because someone told me that the code is decoded in Jeremiah 10, verse 3, and it has the cell phone answer there. It's basically saying, this is a book you read and reread as a spiritual practice, basically all through your life. I actually have other books like that, some of which are philosophy books, and I don't just use the Bible for that regard, but you read it over and over again. It's basically what Gadamer calls the hermeneutical circle. The only way to read the Torah is to bring your deepest self to it. If you ask a trivial question like, well, there was Adam and Eve, and then there was Cain and Abel, so where did Mrs. Cain come from? Right? You're asking a trivial question. You're pretending like this is a little genealogy, like you did your family tree in 7th grade, and this is doing the family tree in Genesis. It's not a human kind of book. It's like a poem. It's like literature, yes. If there's another book, I don't know what it is for you. For me, maybe Brothers Karamazov and Jakobson's Niels Luna and a few others. They're books I can read 1,000 times and I always get something new out of it. It's one of those books. You bring your deepest horizon of significance to it, and you'll find ways of going layer after layer after layer that speak to you, but to someone else it's going to speak differently. In a way, what I'm saying is all the rabbis said about the Torah, about the Bible, is it's a book you can reread a million times as a spiritual practice, and it will enrich you. And the truth is, if you can't make that happen, then don't do it. Like, don't bother. But the idea that you're going to read it literally and say that that's what it means to have faith is anathema in my tradition. That's considered a form of hubris. It's a kind of heresy. It's like, well, you know, I make a laundry list, this makes a laundry list. It's like, no. So in other words, like about Adam and Eve. The rabbis already were saying, are we talking about, like, this is the story of God making an actual Frankenstein kind of creature out of earth and parts and cut it in half and took out a rib? They're like, that's human language. That's not God language. God language is, this is an incredibly deep text that for you and for you and for you, you're going to read it, and it's going to illuminate different questions you have about life, maybe about marriage, maybe about what it means to be human, maybe about human nature. So in that sense, you could say it's a blueprint about what it is to be alive, what it means to be an organism. So for me, I have no problem sort of overlaying that on top of a scientific scheme. So the idea that we read the Bible literally, not so much in my tradition. How about the idea, so you can imagine how it's kind of like year after year after year, writing my papers from my professors and reading thinkers, mostly philosophical thinkers who were mostly making fun of religion, at least in the Anglo-American tradition. The European tradition with Kant and Hegel and Kierkegaard, they have a much deeper feel for it. They're doing something a little different. But here I am seeing people make assumptions about what religion is these assumptions don't seem to relate much to my experience of it. So let's take something else from that we assume about the Bible or about religion. Okay, this. It's really about revelation. It's really about that God spoke to one person, whether it's Jesus or Muhammad or Moses, and they wrote stuff down. And if you believe that that's a supernatural, if you believe that God can really speak and that can really happen, that's what faith means. And if you don't believe that that can happen, then you're really not a person of faith. The only problem, let me just do my tradition. And many Orthodox Jews believe this, and it's one of the disagreements I have with them. The Bible, the Torah, let's just say the first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis through Deuteronomy, were spoken verbatim from the sky. It was a form of dictation, and Moses wrote it down at Mount Sinai. That's a really cool idea. The only problem is it's not anywhere in the Bible. And the rabbis of the Talmud knew this. What the Bible says over and over that makes you think this is God spoke to Moses saying, "Vaydaber Adonai el Moshe lemor," and God spoke to Moses saying. Let's take that phrase and put it aside for 1 minute. What does God say, though, about how God talks? And is this dictation and stenography? Exodus chapters 19 and 20, where the build-up to the Ten Commandments happens, and then the Ten Commandments are given, go out of their way to say that God does not speak in words. God speaks in Hebrew. The word is kolot. It's translated in many of your Bibles as thunder, and it can mean thunder. That's its secondary meaning. Its primary meaning is sounds. Just so you might, so I'm saying, the Bible itself says in Exodus, God spoke in sounds, and the people heard words. Just in case you might think, that means they heard God speaking words. When you get into Deuteronomy, and Moses tells the story of what happened a second time, he actually says again, I just want you guys to know, God spoke in sounds, and the people heard words. And it wasn't the sounds of words. And then again, some of your Bibles will translate this as thunder. Why go out of its way to say that God didn't speak words and God spoke sounds? Why go out of its way, in my tradition, the rabbis of the Talmud asked, to make it so hard? Like, why not just say God spoke in words out of the sky? It doesn't say out of the sky. And Moses wrote them down. The rabbis answer, well, think about it. The Ten Commandments occurs twice in the first 5 books of the Bible, and they're different each time. This is not the 2 copies. This is not Moses got angry and broke one and then, take 2 tablets and call me in the morning. This is, it's the second one. This is actually 2 different descriptions of what God said, and the words vary. So the rabbi said, the Bible went out of its way to say that God spoke in sounds and people hear words, because God doesn't speak in words. God speaks differently. And the sounds of God, we're not exactly sure what it means. And people hear different things. So I'll skip ahead to the way this is understood by one of my heroes. Abraham Joshua Heschel, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel was one of the 1 or 2 great Jewish philosophers of the 20th century. And if anyone's ever interested in any extra reading, I mean, his master, first of all, his dissertation was on the prophets, and the book, if you still go to Barnes & Noble and you look in the religion section, if Barnes & Noble's still in business? Yeah, okay. And then you go to like religion or something. If you look under P or something, you'll probably still find a copy of The Prophets by Heschel. It was his doctoral dissertation. And his major other works are Man is Not Alone and God in Search of Man. And what Heschel basically says is this, and that's what I was raised with, and he's a Talmudic expert. He basically was bringing up the rabbis of the Talmud say. You've got a world in which pretty much every country has a king who rules by divine right. And that king, while they operate according to some universal laws, can still primarily make new laws. And in these countries, you got the haves and you got the have-nots. If it's an agricultural society like Babylon and Egypt, you got the people that own land and you got the people that don't own land. So they got the nobles and you got the serfs. And according to most of the ancient Near East legal codes, if you go into court of law, you get a lot of extra credit if you're a noble versus being a serf. And you come from the royal family versus being a servant. And this is the world in which we live. And my people, whatever we were a tribe of shepherds that somehow ended up, according to our scripture, ended up in Egypt enslaved. We were the immigrants invited in, that then the tables were turned, and we ended up, it wasn't the slavery like American slavery, it was we were put to work in sort of the chain gangs of public work projects. And that was the way the world worked. And somehow we got out, and after we got out, this tribe of shepherds that had very little record, we had very few laws. We only had the customs of a simple shepherd tribe. There's no real revelation, we didn't have much of a legal code, if anything, prior to this event in the early chapters of Exodus. And suddenly they say, how are we going to live? And they write out this legislation that fills Exodus, Leviticus, and then it is repeated in Deuteronomy. And the legislation is, there is no king. God's will is that there's no such thing as a king on earth, because God is the only king. And the legislation says, anyone who's disenfranchised because of the way society works, and it assumes that there will always be some disenfranchised. Whether it is a woman, because women are not allowed to own property back then, so a woman who is, especially a woman who has no husband for whatever reason, and especially if their father and brothers are not still alive, those women essentially become homeless and become the targets become targets. If you're a woman, over and over again, if you're the immigrant, if you're the stranger who lives among us, you're the non-citizen who lives among us in our society, you can be taken advantage of. If you are a fatherless child, so again, you don't have access to the same resources other people have access to. If you don't own land, and this past week, the entire lectionary assignment, we read the first 5 of the books of the Bible every year in synagogue. We do this, and we read it together, and we try to come up with new insights. This past Saturday, the entire reading was about debt. It was about the fact that at some point in your life, almost everyone will go into debt. And when you go into debt, you basically lose control of your own life. And that we go in and out of phases of redemption. We don't live in a redeemed state. Redemption is a temporary state of having control of your life, and in different ways we all go in and out of it, and that's just one of them. So I just want to say, like, all these things that cause you to, all those people have rights in this society. You cannot abuse people who are abusable. You cannot exploit people who are easily exploitable. There's no king. Oh, but courts of justice, courts of law, everyone's equal in a court of law. It distinguishes between independent contractors and daily workers, and it says daily workers have to be paid before sundown. So if you have a landscaper, you have a babysitter, you can't say, oh, I forgot to go to the ATM. In Jewish law, you have to go to the ATM before they leave. You can't say, I'll pay you tomorrow, because you don't know if they need that money. So the law, and you're talking about hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these laws. Back to Heschel. You have a world. It's all hierarchical. You have kings who can do what they want, and exploitation is considered normal. And you have this weird shepherd tribe that gets out and says, God says we need to have a different kind of society, and lays out these laws. That's revelation. What revelation is one moment you have a world in which none of those really rights necessarily exist, certainly not in that order, in that configuration. And then in the world, such a thing exists. That is what we mean by revelation. And the Bible goes out of its way to say, it's not because, what makes it revelation is not that it was spoken from the sky and someone wrote it down. Because after all, philosophically, so what if it was not God speaking it? What if it was all a ruse? Doesn't make it not revelation. What Heschel says is this, and I like it. I mean, it's another version of the holy mystery argument, is fundamentalists today, including Jewish fundamentalists, they want to say that they want to make the extraordinary ordinary. Revelation is about the extraordinariness of that transition. But they're not satisfied with that. They want to make it ordinary, like, well, I can only have faith in it if I can turn it into an ordinary human concept. So I understand dictation, so I'm going to say it's dictation. And then I can believe in that. Heschel says for the Talmudic rabbis, that's the opposite of faith. To turn something extraordinary into something ordinary. To turn the words of God into a simple literal text. To turn the 6 days of creation into 6 human days. The human impulse is to take the extraordinary and make it ordinary, and then make faith about believing in the ordinary. And you've left the religious side behind. So those are some of the issues that I constantly come up against about, I don't like organized religion, and I don't believe that the Bible is literally true, and I am scientific, and I believe in evolution. And we go down this whole list as a rabbi. This is all people who came for a bar mitzvah or a wedding or a funeral, and they take me aside afterwards, by the refreshments, and they're like, you seem like a nice guy, but I can't believe in any of that organized religion stuff because I don't believe in those things. And can you imagine what it's like for me to be a person who's like, I don't believe in those things either. The rabbis of the Talmud didn't believe in those things, and yet that seems to be the picture of what religion is today. I wanted to show you a couple of, let me see, I'll turn it on. Some of the philosophical ideas that influenced me in the process of me basically saying, am I the crazy one and everyone else gets it? Like, am I just reading my own ideas into all this stuff in the Talmud? I'm just way off base and I should shut up? Or should I just go with it and say, you know what, I'm going to be a rabbi like the rabbis of the Talmud, and I'm going to preach this stuff, and I'm going to connect it to the weddings and funerals and bar mitzvahs that I do, and I do. When for anyone who studies, has anyone ever studied Mircea Eliade? Really the person who started the study, really departments of religious studies in this country at the University of Chicago, really created the idea of a department of religion that wouldn't be within a divinity school or a seminary. Great Romanian scholar. When I teach bar mitzvah, I teach Eliade's stuff on initiation rites. And people are always like, what is the rabbi talking about? But by the end of the session, they're like, wow, now I understand what a bar mitzvah is. I want to look at William. Obviously, this is a lesson I do with my parishioners, and you might have read it at the beginning. I had it up there. William James from the Varieties of Religious Experience. Religion, whatever it is a man's total reaction upon life. Total reactions are different from casual reactions, and total attitudes are different from usual or professional attitudes. To get at them, you must go behind the foreground of existence and reach down to that curious sense of the whole residual cosmos as an everlasting presence, intimate or alien, terrible or amusing, lovable or odious, which in some degree everyone possesses. This sense of the world's presence, appealing as it does to our peculiar individual temperament, makes us either strenuous or careless, devout or blasphemous, gloomy or exultant about life at large. And our reaction, involuntary and inarticulate, and often half unconscious as it is the completest of all our answers to the question, what is the character of this universe in which we dwell? When I read that as an undergraduate in my Intro to Religion course or Intro to Religion Philosophy, or I think it was the department seminar for religion majors, it's never left me. So that was whatever it was, 29 years ago. I think you can largely substitute the word universe for God in most propositions, and it still works for me. What does it mean to flourish as a human being in this universe? That's the basic question to me of philosophy and religion. What does it mean to love in this universe? Is there love in this universe? Is there evil in this universe? And what do I think about that? But most of all, what is the character of the given? What is the character of the universe that I experience? Now, Kant says an interesting thing that I think he gets half right and half wrong. Of course, I'm probably wrong because Kant was a lot smarter than I am, but this is still what I think. Kant has something, if you read the Prolegomena to Any Future Metaphysics, brilliant book, by the way. I'd read that instead of the critiques anytime. He says that all of us operate with a cosmological principle. All of us have an idea. As much as time and space must be assumed by your mind, or it just wouldn't be able to function, it would just explode and crash with the blue screen of death. The only way your brain avoids the blue screen of death, you walk around in the world, is you have some sense that the cosmos is a whole system, that you live within a system. It's not random, it's not chaotic, and the system operates according to laws, because the brain thinks in terms of cause and effect. So that you have this concept of a system that you live in. Let's just call it the cosmos or the universe. There's a universe. And all of us have that concept of the universe in our minds. That's where Kant gets it I'll finish what he says. But the universe is never an object of experience, of empirical experience. You can experience trees, you can experience people, you can experience things within the universe, things within that cosmos. But you never experience the cosmos as a whole. The universe as a whole is not itself an object of experience. The whole cannot be a part within the whole, and he's building off of Hume in his critique of religion, the best argument against religious ideas I've ever read, the dialogues on natural religion by Hume, which caused Kant sleepless nights. Hume says that a lot of religious arguments depend on the idea of a universe being of a certain kind, but, and they might say, well, it's like a complicated clock, and someone must have made the clock. And Hume says, well, the problem with that is, actually, a God clock and a human clock can't be the same thing. Basically, it's the bad argument from analogy. We have these analogies, but you can't blow them up to make them so big that it encompasses everything. And Kant builds off of that by saying, Hume's absolutely right, which is that all of us operate with a sense of that there is a universe, but the universe cannot be an object of empirical experience one way or the other. The part that Kant gets wrong to me, in my opinion, is only this, and then I'll go back to James. Kant says, well, what I mean by that is we all assume that the universe is like a little sort of pinball machine or something. It's a little system of causes and effects running according to laws. I don't think that you have to think, I think his first part is totally right, but I don't think that we have to think that. Because Kant said if you think of it any other way, then you're not really being, your brain would rave because it's not really thinking, and we think causally. But if I think, put my cards on the table, if I substitute the little box of pinballs hitting each other for an organism, what if I said, I think my cosmological concept is an organism. I want to think of the universe as a giant organism. An organism still operates according to laws. I don't think my brain would rave in terms of that. I don't think I have to think of it so strictly as Kant did. And I think that that could change my entire orientation in life. If I thought that I live in a gigantic organism rather than in a box of balls knocking into each other. This is what I think James understands, and pragmatism, American pragmatism, especially through Charles Sanders Peirce. If anyone ever studies pragmatism, Peirce used to spend his nights reading Kant. Kant was his Bible. He'd read it, he wouldn't necessarily use the word Kant, and his ideas were a dialectic with Kant. And James is a disciple of Charles Sanders Peirce. So what he's saying is this, and it's just so simple, which is, if you tell me, I think the universe is a scary place full of evil people, I think it's a miserable existence, and you know, those people walk around saying, oh, life is good, and it's full of beauty. They're just not paying attention. That is your sensibility. That's the way you walk around, and that's your religion. That's the way you walk in this universe. That's your path. And then I turn to you and I say, well, what universe do you live in? You're like, oh my God, the universe. It's like, it's beautiful. It's full of beauty. I mean, if you ever saw like Louis C.K.'s last stand-up routine, I mean, okay, I'm getting no nods here. Okay. Louis C.K.'s last HBO special. You know, he's just like, oh my God, we get to live here. We get to like have sex, and we get to eat food, and we get to like have fun, and it's like, I mean, it's, well, that's basically what prayer is. I mean, that's a lot of the blessings are just blessings of gratitude. They're just reminding me like, yes, I mean, my kids just kept me up for 3 nights in a row. I've got a 2-year-old and a 6-month-old, but I'd say about 10% of the time, I'm just like, am I living a dream? This is too good. Like, I can't believe they're so cute. I never thought I'd have kids. I got married late. Like, I mean, I'm like living some fantasy. This is like the coolest thing ever. And then the other 90% of the time I'm pretty miserable because I have no sleep and they spit up on me and I have to clean up and my wife yells at me. So, and that's really the way I live. So like for me, like 10% is like prayer and blessing. Count your blessings. But what is your sensibility? That's your religion. So, you know, like, is religion really, oh yeah, do you believe the Bible's literally the truth? Do you believe in God up in the sky? I believe it's your total reaction about the cosmos. It's your religion. And, you know, can you prove to him that it's more full of beauty than of tragedy? And can there's no end to that argument. That's what the Talmud calls an argument for the sake of heaven. It's not an argument to win. It's an argument to enrich ourselves through the process of argumentation. And so, in that sense, I don't think I could prove to anyone that the universe I live in, my religious sensibility is the universe they should live in. But I join with other people who have a pretty, in my opinion, realistic sense. A similar sensibility. And that's what I call my religious community. I'm mindful of the time, but I want to share a little bit more. Let me go back to a little ontology. Okay, let's, a little Heschel. Abraham Heschel from God in Search of Man. He asks, well, if you say you have religious experiences, so let me talk about an example of religious experience in my life. When I was a doctoral candidate, I left Stanford after 10 years. I was on the 2nd chapter of my dissertation, and I enrolled at rabbinical school. And one of the things that happened to me in those 10 years was that my best friend from college committed suicide. And it was on my birthday, and I went to her apartment in San Francisco, and the door was unlocked as usual, and I found her. So she wanted me to find her so that I'd take care of things. It's the first time I'd ever experienced death in my life. A couple of days later, she came to me in a vision. I'm not a very visual person. You could give me all the drugs in the world, and everyone's like, oh, the walls are breathing, and I'm seeing swans flying across the room, and I'm always like, where are they? I have no idea, I can't see them. So I have no visual, and my wife will attest to that. I'm colorblind, it goes all the way down. So I'm in my bedroom, and I always dream of black and white, and I can't remember any of my dreams. And she's at the stairwell going down. I lived in this tree house in the woods, and she's at this ladder for the tree house, and she's just right there. And I say to her, she's smiling, and I say to her, I'm not going to remember any of this, am I? And she laughs and she says no. I woke up later in my bed, and I don't remember any of it, and I felt so at peace, I can't even tell you. So what happened? First of all, it did influence me in terms of saying, I think this universe is more complicated than meets the eye. Other people would say, you're being a little silly. You needed to have, your brain gave you an experience that you needed to have to make you feel better. And I was like, well, the problem is phenomenologically, in other words, the way it seemed was, nothing like this ever happened to me before. So it didn't look like a dream, didn't feel like a dream, I wasn't asleep, blah, blah, blah. Doesn't matter. Causal explanation is it came from your subconscious, from your brain. By the way, everything comes from your brain, right? I mean, if you're measuring your brain, something's going on. So if you look at it, something's happening. But Heschel addresses this, I think, brilliantly, where he says, the claim that religious thoughts arise from the vortex of the subconscious would, he claims, merely substitute an enigma for the mystery. The subconscious is a hypothesis so wide and so vague that it is hardly more positively known to us than the idea of the supernatural. That blew me away when I first read it. Because the person who says, in my world, in my cosmos, in my universe, what you think happened didn't happen. What happened was your brain made it happen. It came from your subconscious. And Heschel's saying, hey, what's the cardinal rule of philosophy? Don't explain a concept. Don't explain a complicated concept with a concept more complicated than the original concept. It's broken by philosophers every day. The whole idea of philosophy is to make things simpler and more understandable and comprehensible. And Heschel's saying, it sounds, it's sophistry. It sounds like, you know what, it came from your subconscious, like I just was really scientific and hard-nosed, and you're the touchy-feely religious type. But he's like, where is the subconscious? Is the subconscious really empirical? My brother's a neuroscientist at Harvard, right? Leading research in the world, one of the leading research in the world in addiction, works on brains every day. He's older than I am, he has for years, got his PhD here in San Diego. And, he's never found the subconscious yet. I mean, it's not in there. So, is it really a scientific statement? And what Heschel's really saying is the concept of a subconscious that produces things that you need magically when you need them, explain anything better than saying the universe may include things we don't fully understand. And I choose to live in the universe in which when I do funerals and when I talk to people and they tell me about visitations, they tell me about signs and omens, I think it's possible. So I wanted to give you an example of something very concrete about what kind of universe do you live in? And what is your sensibility? And when the pressure comes from the skeptic to say, you're imagining things, you're enriching things, you need to do that for your own sense of religion is really a massive attempt to cope with the anxiety of life. It sure is. I hope that you can cope with the anxiety of life. Unfortunately, religion doesn't really make it any easier to cope with the anxiety of life. It just talks about it. Where you have a revelation directly to some of our patriarchs, when is it that God appears to, let's say, Jacob? and he fights with the angel of God. Actually, it doesn't say, well, at one point it says it's an angel, at the other point it says he fought with God directly. It's when he's ripped off the birthright of his brother, and he's taken command of the tribe, but being a shepherd doesn't pay well, so he's really just a poor shepherd with a bunch of goats, and he runs into his brother who's gone off and created an army. And they reunite after years and years, and he's being surrounded by the army of his brother Esau. And he's convinced that he and his children and his wife are all going to be slaughtered. And that's when and it says he fell into a sleep in his anxiety. And he had the dream that God basically, he fought with the angel and he won, and the next day he woke up in peace. And he went to greet his brother. Does anybody remember what Esau does at that point? He hugs and kisses him. He says, I've missed you, my brother. He was sure his brother was going to kill him. Others, Abraham has been promised that his tribe will continue, but he has no children. It says Abraham was anxious and full of stress. He fell into a tardema, the sleep of God, the sleep of the dead. Fell into a kind of, it's usually translated a very deep sleep, but it's a unique word. And that's where God says, don't worry. Even though you're advanced in life, you'll have children. So in other words, religion is about dealing with the anxieties of life. That's what it actually says in the Bible. It doesn't mean that I have some easy answer that gets me through the day. It means that it's an ongoing process of reading scripture and reading science and thinking about these things. I'll conclude with one statement, and I really appreciate your attention. It's very, very kind. Okay, Rabbi. Well, then what's prayer? Prayer. Let me tell you a little bit about the Jewish service as I understand it. And I haven't heard other rabbis read it this way because one of the reasons I became a rabbi is I thought I knew I couldn't become a better philosopher than my teachers, but I knew I could become a better rabbi than my rabbis. So that's usually a good way to decide what you're going to do in life. And my rabbis were always like, oh yeah, we're on page 63. Okay, read it to yourself. Now we'll be on page 64. That's pretty much prayer as I inherited it. Either that or let's sing it, maybe we can make it a pretty song, and that's supposed to be religious, but it's just a bunch of words about God, you're great, thank you very much, you're so awesome. But if you actually look at the service, let's just say the Saturday morning service, our main service of the week, the first couple of pages say, everything that is full of life is making music to God that forms a symphony. In the field of bioacoustics, where they take sensitive microphones, they stick them in oceans, they stick them on leaves, and they put them in the bushes, and out in the field over there, and they let computers analyze this stuff, you find that insects and animals and all kinds of things generally work in certain kinds of patterns and harmonies. I think that part is true. I don't think it's a metaphor. We actually start with 3 pages of saying everything that has life in it is praising God. This actually praising is attesting to God all of the time. Then it switches to 3 pages that talks about the stars and energy and goes back to the language from Genesis of energy. And it says everything made of energy is part of the music. So you're kind of going from the inner circle of biology to an outer circle of physics. Everything that's made of energy is actually operating according to frequencies and is part of a gigantic system, a symphony of music. And then you get one more page that says, you get another page that says, the angels are singing too. If you go back to the Talmud and you ask what are angels, they're not like It's a Wonderful Life. They're not like the little guy who says, George, you can borrow the mic. And they're also not little babies, cupids, throwing arrows. The rabbis say, angels, they are like computer programs. They have no free will and they don't have personalities. They just simply are systems that follow orders of God by rote. So they're like programs written temporarily, and they follow their thing, and then they move on, or they stop. Let's just call it also part of this music are universes that intersect with our own. I call it theoretical physics. My closest friend from college is a theoretical physicist, and he says things like, I'm not religious, and I don't buy into any of your stuff, Nadav, but I say, well, what's the conclusion of all your, he's a professor, all of your theoretical physics stuff? I said, what's the latest? He always answers me the same. The universe behaves very strangely. Now, remember when I said it's a weird thing to say infinity wanted to produce something finite? Well, he just personified the atheist, right? The universe behaves. Right? I thought behave was a human word. Behaves very strangely. I think step number 3 of the prayer, the invisible universes that we may never be able to measure with tools that intersect with our own is part of the same system. Then we take a prayer where it's silent, where we say, one day a week, I take the time to listen. And the next page is the Shema. The next page is our one line of creed. And I'm going to end with that. And our one line of creed, so you can see this is a lesson, these are the actual prayers. And if anyone wants it, I can always email it to them. I have a PDF. So this is the morning service, and it's kind of interesting. And it ends with, you can see the blessing before, blessed are you, Adonai, who forms that which radiates energy. And then you head into the Shema. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. The only line of creed in the Jewish tradition, which means listen, the people of Israel, like listen Jews, listen up. The unpronounceable name of God, so just say the Lord or the universe is our God, the Lord is one. I think Eloheinu, our God, I don't think our means Jews. I have a lot of problem actually with, I do it, but I do it begrudgingly. I'm not a big fan of like interfaith work. I don't think it's all about like sharing all this stuff. But listen Israel, listen Jews, the God of the universe is all of our God. It's the God of the caterpillar, the God of the termite making the music, the God of the universes that are intersecting with our own. Adonai Echad. It's all part of one system. That's the cosmological principle. That's what I pray. I pray it every morning. I listen, I expand my mind, and then I say, all of this is part of one system. And then I figure out how to live in it. Thanks very much for your attention. I'd be happy to take some questions. I'll leave something interesting up there for people who'd rather not listen to me. So there we go. Please.
Yeah, about a little over 10 minutes ago, you said that you believe that your religion is your sensibility of the universe. So, can I be religious if I don't believe in God?
I think everybody, yes, because I think that for me, the word God is something like your cosmological principle that everyone has to operate with. That you unavoidably have a sense of, and William James put in simple language, of the universe. What do you think the universe is like? And it's not even just what you think about it. How do you, if you look at the way you behave in life, what is the universe that you're assuming is there? Go ahead.
Haven't you now stretched the concept of religion where it's so thin it's become meaningless?
No, I think quite the opposite. If I stretch the concept of religion so thin that it's become meaningless, no, because I think this is the starting point. I think it's the starting point of the conversation, which is not, well, I don't believe in God, I believe in a universe. To say, well, what's this universe that you believe in? For example, if it's the universe of, well, causality, right? That well, there's really no free will, and I took intro to philosophy of mind or intro to whatever it is, and then someone says, well, fractal theory and chaos theory kind of changed the paradigm about causality. Maybe even scientifically, there may be randomness in the universe in a way that you're not assuming in your picture. I'll go back one step, which is only this, which is, if anybody ever reads any Thomas Kuhn, Structure of Scientific Revolutions, or the stuff on his stuff, what's the paradigm that you're living in? And the idea is that we're supposed to be sharing our paradigms and growing. I think that, have we stretched religion so thin? I would say this. Given a longer conversation, I would say, I've thought about what universe I live in, and now let me explain to you what my paradigm is. I started, let's say, a little bit with my experience of my friend who had died. That's just a tiny step. Given a week, a month, time together as a community, I think what we start doing is developing that paradigm of what is life really like? Let's expand our consciousness. And so it's certainly a fair question, but I'll stick with my answer, that we're not watering down religion so much. We're starting a conversation that can take you to a certain place. What I don't think is this. I don't think we stop at that point. I do think I'm a communitarian enough, as much as I think McIntyre is a bit of charlatan. I do think that I'm communitarian enough to know that it's within conversation, within communities. I mean, philosophy itself is a community of dialogue. That you actually share and work out these things, and you grow. But look, it's a fair question. I mean, it really is. Anyways, please.
There is a new book out called Philosophers, was written by a neurosurgeon who's been studying brain all that time. It was so scientific that he did not particularly believe God. Goes into a coma, experiences heaven, comes back, and tells everybody. What's your brother think about it?
The Proof of Heaven book, which is a neurologist who, what do you call it, end of life out of experience, and writes about it. Near death experience, thank you. I'll give you a short answer on that, but before that, I'm going to give you if you ever answer questions, I learned this from all my philosophy professors, just answer the question you want to answer. It doesn't matter what the question was. Very helpful tip. Heschel, where he's trying to explain what is it if you can consume all of this commentary from the Talmud, from the Torah itself, the Bible itself, through the medieval period, fascinating stuff through the mysticism, through the Jewish philosophy, through Jewish existentialism. Where does it kind of leave you? How can you kind of think about it? And he says this: the primary religious, I always forget the word, attribute's the wrong word, predisposition. What makes one person religious more than another is humility. I think that my paradigm, as complex as it is, and I haven't talked about it much, because let me teach a course on Judaism and give me a semester and we'll talk about it. But is this: I have no idea what this universe is. The walk in life I try to take is that the universe behaves very strangely, and that I try to avoid the hubris that it is all just one big system of causes and effects, as Kant thought. Or someone else says, it's all just one big scientific causal system, and all the spiritual and other stuff's a bunch of hooey. It's unimaginable what the universe is as a whole. And I read a lot of theoretical, the popular books, the superstring theory books and things like that. We can't imagine. I mean, I have all these quotes I could have shown you from the rabbis from 1,000 years ago. And they talk about the fact that you can't imagine what infinity is. If you saw the quote I had up when I was drinking water at the beginning, I mean, it basically says, if you can take 5 minutes to actually relate to infinity, you'll experience two things: awe, A-W-E, and love. The love in your soul will expand. Sometimes I spend a whole session just saying, how is that possibly true? How does contemplating infinity cause you to love? I think the best movie ever made about religion was the movie Contact, which was really Carl Sagan's book about a scientist trying to relate to religion. He also does what I did in this talk, and I probably offended someone. I really hope I didn't, which is he actually has a character who's a fundamentalist and a character who's a Heschelian, who's a liberal religious thinker. And he basically automatically says fundamentalists are kind of charlatans. And then he says that now let's deal with Matthew McConaughey. I would have cast somebody else, but I don't know. And Matthew McConaughey is representing this vast, I mean, it's called the liberal tradition like it's only 50 years old. But then the Talmud's part of the liberal tradition, and the Bible's part of the liberal. So I'll just say this, that it's the humility that none of us really understand the whole picture. And when you say, so how do I deal with the book about the afterlife? I consider an attempt to share an experience, rather than say, now I know what the picture is. It's reincarnation, or it's you see the light. I'm a holist in the sense that if one part of the picture that I've embraced crumbles, I usually have enough other parts where I can say, I can reinterpret that part. So on the one hand, I'm excited. I'm like, great. I've got this like buttress for my feelings and intuitions and sensibilities about that the universe allows for life after death. But if someone came up with the stuff, someone said it turned out he's all lying because he wanted to sell books and he had to pay back his gambling debts from Vegas, then I would say, I can live without the book too. One of my favorite quotes is from Jeffrey Stout's book, The Flight from Authority. Brilliant thinker and philosopher, ethicist. And he starts the book by saying that basically all of us live in a boat, the German philosopher Neuroth's boat, which is we have planks that we've put together that give us our picture of the world and how it works, and we float along in the boat. But just because we lose one plank doesn't mean that the boat always sinks. For example, you may find out, oh, there's multiple authorship of the Bible. Doesn't mean like, okay, I'm going to take off my kippah and now I'm not a rabbi anymore. I mean, for example, I'm not, that you read the JEPD. Well, the rabbis knew about JEPD. The Torah doesn't hide the fact that it has multiple authors. The book of Deuteronomy itself calls itself its own Torah. The book of Leviticus ends and says this is its own Torah. Clearly, there were different publications of different parts of the Torah at different times, and it's a mosaic document put together. But for some people, when they took an intro to Bible course at college and they found out, there's really multiple strata here in the Torah, they're like, oh, well then, I'm not going to keep kosher anymore. I'm going to eat as much ham as I like. Well, you know what? One plank comes up. If one plank destroyed your whole religious sensibility, probably didn't have that rich a religious sensibility. If one thing the person you're dating does wrong, I really can't stand that. That they double dip. I just can't date them anymore. The love probably wasn't there. So anyway, I would say that I take all of those books, and I really think there's a great possibility that life and death are much more complicated than it looks. But I don't say, now I have proof that my ship is the right ship.
Why do you think today there's such a strong push by some people to be secular and to deny any need to be religious?
Why do I think that there's such a push today to be secular and to deny anything religious? I wish I had the answer to that question. I think that, I also think there's a great, evangelicalism has really spread, and Pentecostalism has spread, Orthodox Judaism is, particularly ultra-Orthodox Judaism is spread. So you also have the other pole, which is that people far on the right have also increased. And I wish I had a better answer to that question. I do think that, because I hear out of the mouths of Jewish rabbis, especially Orthodox rabbis, things that sound to me like they come from evangelical Christianity. Like I've heard Orthodox rabbis say, of course we don't believe in evolution. And of course we believe that the universe was created in 6 days. And I'm like, did you read the Talmud? Did they not include that in your training? So part of me is like, did you get that from Jerry Falwell? Where are you getting the idea from? Because so we have more extremes on the right, and we have more extremes on the secular. And I think that since I don't have a good, I do think that on the right, people are dealing with the fact that, maybe it's a stupid answer, I don't know. Life is pretty chaotic. It used to be that, you could grow up in a small town, and, if you were schizophrenic, they had you do the hay in the hayloft. And everyone knew you were different, you were taken care of. Now you're on the street homeless. It used to be that life, I do think, was a little bit simpler, and we live in a world in which we don't know if we're going to have a job after college, we don't know if we're going to meet someone, we don't know if we're going to be able to have kids, and all these kinds of things, and be able to make it, and pay back the student loans. And I think it drives some people to the security of very fundamentalist, fixed ideas that that's going to be what I set my life on. And then you've got all the secularists, and I just think, I'll answer what Heschel says. At the beginning, the first paragraph of God in Search of Man, this book that I think is one of the best books ever written, he says, people want to blame the failures of religion on the rise of science. I spent my entire academic career believing that statement. So when he started with that, I said, uh-oh. He said, people want to blame the failures of religion by the rise of science. But religion's failures are due to its own fault. It's become irrelevant. To people. And that's what I said. Like when I look at my rabbis, and I'm not trying to be a jerk about it, but I'm like, really? I mean, I just went to temple, I just went to synagogue, I just went to church. That's the best they can do? I mean, if that's the best they can do, I'm not interested in coming back. So like part of it is religion lost people because it somehow lost its ability to make the religion relevant to people. If anyone ever takes a religion course here and you need to do like some field work for the paper, feel free to give me a call if you're willing to drive out to Rancho Bernardo or Escondido area. And I'd be happy to let you do it at our synagogue, or to come to a service or write your essay or whatever the thing's going to be. But one of the things that I rewrote the mission statement of my synagogue, and about a couple weeks ago with the board, and I said that we stand for connecting people to our religion's wisdom in a practical way. It has to be practical. And then when people say, oh, I didn't know how to deal with the fact that I'm just living my life, driving my kids from soccer practice to baseball practice to karate practice, or no, I'm sorry, judo or something else. And then back to, and I say, listen, let's read a part of the Talmud that talks about how you deal with this. And then they're like, oh, this actually helped me. It's not the rise of science that killed religion. It's that we gave inane sermons. And if we gave sermons and Jews were the worst of this, just go out and be a good person. Go out and be a good person. If that's every sermon you ever hear, do you really need to go to church to hear it again? If they don't say, well, how do you be a good person? How do you navigate these things in your relationship? I did an 11th and 12th grade program last year in my office, and we talked about sexual ethics. And I got complaints from the parents. And they told me, oh my God, you talk about orgasms with my kids. And I'm like, they're in 11th and 12th grade. I'm like, and they're going off to college. And they're like, yeah, I don't want my rabbi to talk to my kids about, orgasms. And I said, well, you know what? It says in the Mishnah, 2,000 years ago, a woman can divorce a man for 3 reasons. Number 1, he doesn't provide food and shelter. Number 2, he doesn't provide clothing and other necessities of life. And number 3, he doesn't give her sexual pleasure. So like, I'm sorry if you're uncomfortable with the concept of an orgasm, but when I shared it with the 11th and 12th graders and I told them, girls don't automatically have orgasms, they were all like, what are you talking about? So I'm like, you know what, let's talk about this before you go to college. So I'm talking about, that came out the wrong way. So that's what I mean by practical sexual ethics, that's me. But if it's just like, be a good boy when you go out to college, I don't see any reason they're going to come to me instead of go play soccer with their friends. I think we have like 1 minute. Anybody else? Yeah, please.
First of all, thank you. I feel very anxious about the many books that I have to read, especially the Bible.
That should make you anxious, absolutely.
But I grew up Catholic, and as I went to college, I grew up very cynical about religion in general, because I remember the experiences of early, introduction to religion, and having to wake up in the morning and do a lot of rituals that I felt were meaningless at that age for me. But then, I also came to understand religion in terms of what it provides to us as social beings. And I read, some work in Kushner,
Yeah.
Harold Kushner, and then also Viktor Frankl, and both of them speak about this social aspect of religion that's very important regardless of people's, cynicism at one point. And, as we gain some intellect, especially as we go to college, there's that direction that we take. And there's a lot to be critical about in religious organizations.
Yep.
But there's that element. And I think about that, when people die, people that we love, and what it does to us to be in communion with others, especially when we commune with others in prayer. I wonder if we can speak a little bit about that social aspect of religion that I believe is probably central to the conversation.
Said it better than I could. When I was in academia, I lived in a treehouse in the Santa Cruz Mountains, hand-built, for about 10 years. And I would go to TA, and at that point I was done with my coursework, and I could just work, and I love being alone. I just love it. And I love my own company. And, when the night came, these things are ancient to you. I drank a bottle of wine and crank Radiohead at like 11, and it was just me and 300 acres of nature preserve. And I was also really depressed. I just felt like the conversation about, I mean, I was happy, I was depressed, you know. I thought it was because I was frustrated in the academic world, that I felt that when I went to conferences, everyone was having such a good time, and I wasn't. I would sit there and listen to papers, and the papers, I'd be like, they totally got Spinoza wrong. Like, is anyone gonna call them on that? You know what I mean? And everyone would be like, God, Nadav, just relax and have a beer. Like, this is academia. Like, we give our papers, we have a good time, we hit the bar, you see your friends, you know, stay in a hotel room, you go home. And I was like frustrated and depressed. So I started teaching high school students at my local synagogue because I could tell they hated services as much as I did. So I was like, okay, let's sit outside and we'll read Martin Buber together. We'll read I Thou, you know, if, and they'd be like, I'm going to write my college essay on this book. This is awesome. And I'm like, really? I think the same thing. One day, I was 39, I was in an invitation-only colloquium at Stanford. So there was only like 15 people invited. It was a visiting scholar from like another place, and this will be the last thing I say. But I know people have to go, and it's not impolite to do so. I was sitting around, and the scholar had not arrived yet, a little bit like me today. And I thought I'd make conversation at the table. And I said, by the way, you guys should know, last night I was teaching a bunch of high school students at the local synagogue Kierkegaard. I love Kierkegaard. And they were like totally into it. And they thought this and this, and I was making conversation. And I realized how much I loved that social connection to doing this. And someone in the room turned to me and said, the reason you like doing that was because they don't know anything. And it was an ego trip for you. It's in this room, at an invitation-only academic colloquium, that what you say really matters. Because you don't get to be the big shot. It's not an ego trip. Anyone can say, you totally have Kant wrong. You got the cosmological principle, you don't know what you're talking about. I went home and I stayed up half the night. And I had to decide, is she right? Am I on an ego trip with the kids? And it's just my way of coping with the fact that I'm not happy at the conferences. And at the end of the night, I mean, halfway through the night, I figured, this is where I turn my spade. In other words, this is the day I make the decision about my life. I think she's wrong. I actually think that my connection to that community and me sharing this stuff and helping them write their college essays and sharing the joys and sorrows, and then they take me home to meet their parents, and then it grows from that into a study group, and then it grows from that into you should be a rabbi. I think that's nourishing my soul. And I'm connecting to people and to God, even though I thought I'd love living in the treehouse and writing philosophy. And I think she's wrong. And it's not, and so that's pretty much the day I decided I'm gonna switch because of what you said. We're social beings. If anything about that story of Adam and Eve is saying, one of the things the rabbis say is, it's not good for man to be alone. You know, and we think it sometimes is. We need to connect with other people. Is God checking me off for my obedience? Am I going to go to heaven and God's going to be like, well, you missed Mass that May in 2013, or you missed your service, or you know, you did those Yom Kippur, you had your Hanukkah, you know, you had your Passover. It's not about obedience, and it's not about whether the sacraments, the social thing is about the fact that you got to inhabit a body and live in this world. And did you raise your cup up with others and share with them your joys and your sorrows? And if you scratch beneath the surface of any adult beyond a certain age, you will find tragedy and sorrows. You find an autistic brother. You find a child that was miscarried. You found a father that died when they were 11. You find breast cancer, and friends who majors with me in the department who died at 31. Mental illness. If you don't realize that this is a conversation meant to happen together, you're supposed to be sharing this journey with others, and it will nourish your soul to do so, then you don't understand what religion's about. We're not meant to be alone. We are social creatures, and we're meant to play our part in the symphony. And we're not meant to be doing it I want to thank you very much.
Rabbi Kane, it's been a great pleasure to have you here. Thanks for coming to Grossmont College and enlightening us. Thanks to all the students and faculty who attended. Make sure you get some punch and treats before you go.